My dad, William, stood up in court and said I wasn't his real son. That's why he was cutting me out of the will. I didn't flinch. I just reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope I'd been saving for 12 years. It held a letter written by my mother, Linda. And a DNA test. You said I'm not your son, I said calmly. Let's talk about that. Let's tell them who really isn't family here. My stepmother, Amanda, turned pale. My father's lawyer, Gregory, looked down. And suddenly everyone wanted to know what was in that envelope. They thought they could erase me quietly. But I came prepared. They called me a mistake. Today, they'll remember me as the one who told the truth and ended their lies. I'm Caleb. And what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's the moment I took back everything they tried to erase, my name, my bloodline, my worth. But before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say "listening" in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If this story touches something in you, or if you believe no one deserves to be silenced by their own family, please subscribe. Your support means more than you know. It would help stories like mine be heard. The moment I stepped into the Maricopa County Courthouse, it felt like the air shifted. People turned. Whispers circled. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, family, old business acquaintances. And even a few press photographers angling their lenses like vultures eyeing a carcass. There were over 300 people packed into the room. And still, somehow, I felt utterly alone. I slid into the farthest bench, placing myself a deliberate distance from Edward and Olivia, who sat like a portrait of power and privilege at the front. I wasn't part of that frame. Not anymore. Maybe I never was. Henry sat with his usual stiff posture, shoulders square, arms crossed, gaze sharp as ever. Even in a courtroom, he looked like he was about to lead a shareholder meeting. That was how he'd always been. For 30 years, I'd lived in his house. But never once felt it was mine. He was the CEO of the family. I was a contracted intern, never confirmed, never fully trusted. The judge called for witness order. I was next. But before I could rise, Arthur shot up from his seat. Voice loud, echoing off the oak-paneled walls. I object, he said. This young man is not my biological son. As of today, I am terminating all financial support. He no longer represents the Harrington name. There was an audible gasp across the room. The kind of collective intake of breath you hear when a dam cracks. Gasps, whispers, the screech of a pen dropping somewhere. Behind Frank, Sophia froze. She tugged at his sleeve, whispering something with urgency. But he yanked his arm away. His eyes fixed on the judge as if delivering gospel truth. Noah, their baby, cried out from her lap. It was a piercing wail, shrill and unrelenting. Like the only innocent soul in the room could feel the sickness in the air. I stood, but not in anger, not in tears. I smiled. It wasn't the cruel, smug kind of smile. It was the kind Patricia, my mother, used to say lit up the whole kitchen. A smile born from knowing, from long preparation. From the taste of truth that had sat bitter on my tongue for years. I approached the podium like I had been waiting my entire life for this moment. Thank you, Ronald, I thought. You just handed me the mic. I placed my leather briefcase gently on the stand. My hand rested on the inside pocket, feeling the shape of a sealed white envelope. I'd kept it hidden for 2 weeks. Not because I was unsure, but because timing mattered. If today is about bloodlines, I thought, let's go all in. The judge gestured for me to speak. I adjusted the microphone and leaned in. Before I could speak my truth, the courtroom faded away. My mind drifted back, not by choice, but by instinct. To the woman who made me who I am, Diane. That house, the same mansion in Paradise Valley where we all once lived, had never been warm, except when she was there. She made warmth out of cold marble. And gave life to a place that Kenneth had built like a monument, not a home. Nancy would read The Great Gatsby to me before bed. Her voice steady, her fingers tracing the margins of the old pages. Like she'd lived inside the story. Never let anyone make you feel unworthy of love, she'd whispered to me once. After Peter ignored my science fair ribbon. When I turned 12, she sat me down in the garden beneath the fig tree. And told me gently that I wasn't Gary's biological son. But it didn't change anything. Not for her. I was still hers completely. At 26, I held her hand as cancer took what years hadn't. She spent her last breath telling me I was her light. Donald didn't make it to the hospital in time. His assistant emailed some legal forms instead. 6 months after she passed, Charlotte arrived. She didn't enter the house. She invaded it. Her heels clicked across marble like they belonged. Tall, stunning, glacial. I remember the first thing she said when we met. Oh, so this is the son, like I was a misplaced sculpture she intended to auction off. Within weeks, everything changed. The kitchen no longer smelled like Barbara's molasses cookies, but instead some overpriced sandalwood diffuser. Her armchair disappeared, replaced by a crystal display case. Family photos vanished, ours anyway. In their place were stylized portraits of Richard and Victoria, perfectly lit, soulless. And Martin. He followed her like a man hypnotized. It was like he wanted to rewrite his legacy from scratch. When Stephanie announced her pregnancy, Philip cried. Actually cried. I remember watching him place his hand over her belly, whispering, This is our second chance to get it right. The words clanged in my ears like metal dropped on tile. I understood in that moment I was a draft, an error in judgment. A holding place until the real son arrived. Then came Liam. He was born on a warm Tuesday in March. Healthy, curious eyes, a tuft of coppery hair like Christopher's, not Harold's. Though nobody seemed to notice. Patrick cradled him like he'd found a lost treasure. I watched from behind the glass of the NICU, invisible. Just another hospital visitor. 2 weeks later, I noticed Abigail wearing Margaret's emerald ring. The one she'd promised to leave to me. I confronted her. Where did you get that? She smiled. Found it in an old box in the basement. It suits me, don't you think? No, it didn't. It never would. It belonged to a woman who lived with grace, not calculation. That night, I stood alone in the main hall of the mansion. In the shadows, I found one of Elizabeth's old photos, dusty, shoved behind a vase. Across from it hung a new framed image, Anthony, Lauren, and Owen. The official portrait, the future, the version of family I'd been scrubbed from. And yet, something within me didn't break. It burned. I remember standing there thinking, you can erase me from the walls, from the name, from the narrative. But you will never erase the truth. Not from my memory, and not from this courtroom. And as I reached into my briefcase, the edge of that white envelope pressing against my fingers. I knew Carol didn't raise me to disappear. She raised me to speak. Nicholas started showing up more often, always with a casual excuse. Just checking in on the portfolio, he'd say. Or, thought we could streamline the operations. Jeffrey liked efficiency. But he never used to care about efficiency. Not when Judith was alive. I watched him cross the foyer one afternoon, a bouquet of calla lilies in hand. Rebecca appeared just seconds later, tugging lightly at the ends of her hair, smoothing her blouse. She claimed she hadn't seen him in months. But when their eyes met, just for a second, it felt like I was in the wrong room. Their silences were louder than their words. That night, I stayed late in the den, sorting tax forms. Around 1 a.m., the hallway light clicked on. I crept past the corner, stopping by the kitchen entry. The fridge cast a soft white glow. Samantha was on the phone. Her voice was low, but agitated. Stop sending the bears. David, Roger might not notice, but he does. And Evan, he's not reading yet, but Caleb isn't an idiot. The next morning, I installed a voice recorder inside the smoke detector in the study. I started digging, pulling hotel records under the Harrington corporate account. Transactions that never made it to the primary books. A boutique resort in Tybee Island booked under consulting services. Charges for champagne, chocolates, children's toys. I knew what it meant, but I needed proof. That's when Albert's laptop crashed during a software update. He was yelling about it from the veranda. I took it, quietly copied the drive while reinstalling the system. What I found made my chest burn. A deleted email, barely recovered from the local cache. Let him leave on his own. Humiliate him in front of them all. It's easier when the decision looks mutual. I didn't know who sent it, but it was forwarded by Hannah. 3 days before Catherine died, I went into Walter's office pretending to tidy up. Hidden in the mantel above the fireplace was the tiny camera Dorothy had once installed. After the safe had been tampered with. Matthew forgot it existed. She never did. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage. Then I found it. Michelle and Christopher on the Harrington leather sofa. A blanket thrown over Jacob's sleeping form. Their hands under the throw, bodies too close. Her head resting against his chest. I transferred the footage onto a secure USB. Hid it in an old copy of The Great Gatsby. Right beneath the paragraph where Gatsby said, "Can't repeat the past." Why, of course you can. That night, I plucked a few hairs from Benjamin's brush in the guest bathroom. From Isaac's pacifier, I dabbed a sample. From Stephen's silver comb, a strand of gray. I mailed it to a lab in Asheville. Discreet, private, no questions. 5 days later, the result landed in my inbox. 99.9% match. Nathan Harrington is the biological father of Lucas Harrington. I printed 2 copies, sealed them in white envelopes. On the front, I wrote in black ink, "Truth from Eleanor." And for the first time in weeks, I slept with the door locked. I sat at the dining table, lights off, the envelope in my hand like a loaded weapon. 2 nights passed, and I still hadn't told George. This truth wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about legacy. Ellen had fought tooth and nail to protect what was left of her name, her son, her line. And they'd planned to erase it just like that. I reread a passage from Gatsby Before Sunrise. The one where Nick says, "No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart." My ghost. It wasn't longing. It was justice. I created a digital vault on my laptop labeled Ellen Archive. Inside, I placed the video footage, audio from the late-night phone call, recovered emails, hotel invoices, DNA results. I sent a secured backup to Rachel Monroe, my attorney since grad school. She called back immediately, her voice steady. "You realize," she said, "this could implode the entire Harrington legacy. Are you ready for that?" "I'm not," I whispered. But Ellen was. The next morning, I listened to the feed from the hidden mic behind Ronald's framed photo. Vanessa's voice, controlled. "I've already spoken to the judge. We'll motion to disqualify Caleb from speaking unless pre-approved. He won't be able to contest anything." Philip's chuckle followed. "Perfect. Let the bastard nod his head and disappear. Lucas takes over. The board will love that. Young blood." I gripped the edge of the desk, my pulse loud in my ears. They weren't just planning to silence me. They were making Lucas their pawn, a child, my brother's son. 1 week before the hearing, Andrew went public. He appeared on a podcast called Savannah Voices, a cozy local show about community leaders. Halfway through the interview, he smirked and said, "Sometimes grief makes people paranoid. And when you add money and inheritance, it's a volatile mix. You have to remember not everyone belongs in the room, no matter how hard they try. Subtle, insidious, dangerous." I realized then they were stacking the narrative, making me the madman before I ever stepped into court. That evening, Susan called me. She was crying. The kind of crying that makes your knuckles go cold. "I tried to warn Ellen," she said. "But Lauren told me to keep quiet, or I'd lose my pension." I saw Nicholas leaving Olivia's room more than once. At night, before Miss Ellen passed. "Can you testify?" I asked. "I'm scared," she said. "They know where my daughter lives. If they find out I helped, you won't be alone," I told her. "Not anymore." She didn't promise, but she didn't hang up either. The next morning, I ironed my only tailored suit. Navy with the slim lapel Ellen always said made me look trustworthy. As I buttoned the cufflinks, I remembered her whisper in that same hallway 3 years ago. "Never beg them to see your worth, Caleb. Show them." I slid the white envelope into the secret compartment of my briefcase. Outside, the sky had that thick, storm-heavy stillness. Not quite thunder, not quite peace. Before stepping out, I placed my hand on the doorframe and whispered, "Today, Mom." We burned the lies down. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Not just legal staff and family, journalists lined the back wall. And I caught the red blink of a recording light from someone's phone. Jessica wore a charcoal gray dress, tight at the shoulders. Her mouth drawn into a thin, professional line. Her hand rested on Ethan's shoulder as he fidgeted beside her. 2 rows behind me, Christopher sat stiffly, expression unreadable. But his gaze burned a hole through my back. Harold walked in last. His posture was impeccable, his expression carved from marble. Not once did his eyes meet mine. When the judge called my name to take the stand, Kenneth's lawyer stood immediately. But Daniel cut him off by rising. "I object," Daniel said, voice sharp enough to slice the air. "This individual is no longer a legal heir. There is no blood tie. As of today, I am revoking all financial and legal support." The room fell into a stunned silence. Owen whimpered. Rebecca's hand gripped the chair tightly. She leaned toward Patrick and whispered something rapid and low. But he didn't acknowledge her. Her composure cracked, not from compassion, but from fear. The judge glanced my way. "Do you have a response?" I stood. "Your Honor, if I may speak, I think the court deserves full transparency today." After a short pause and some legal murmuring, the judge granted me a few minutes. I stepped toward the center, the envelope in my hand firm against my palm. "Walter is correct," I began. "I am not his biological son. Margaret told me that when I was 12. But she also told me love is a choice, and she chose me. Meanwhile, Stephen has only ever chosen power." Gasps whispered through the rows. I held up the envelope. If today is about truth, then all of it deserves daylight. From the envelope, I unfolded the DNA report. "Lucas Harrington," I read, "is not Ronald's son. He is Christopher's. The results confirm it with 99.9% certainty." Chaos erupted. Lauren screamed, lunging forward. "Lies. Don't believe him. He's mentally unstable." Nicholas bolted up, then stormed out without a word. Abigail grabbed Ethan's hand and tried to follow, but tripped, her heels catching the carpet. She fell hard in front of the gallery, her skirt bunched awkwardly. Gasps echoing through the courtroom. I didn't move. I only continued. I didn't come here for vengeance. But I will not be silenced. Victoria deceived you, Philip. Benjamin buried a knife between your ribs while smiling. I'm the only one who stood here and told you the truth. I paused. And that ring on her hand, that was Ellen's. If you don't find that insulting, then perhaps you never truly loved my mother. Samantha stumbled up, yanking Owen, and pushed through the courtroom doors. The heavy wooden panel slammed shut behind her. George collapsed into the nearest seat, visibly shaken, pale. I returned to my place, not victorious, just empty. But the truth was finally spoken, and there was no taking it back. 2 days after the trial, the video went viral. A 37-second clip of me exposing the DNA results at the witness stand made its way onto TikTok, X, and Reddit. The caption read, "Adopted son destroys dynasty with one envelope." It reached 3 million views in a day. Comments flooded in, some calling me brave, others calling me cruel. Finally, someone stands up to rich manipulators, one read. Another said, entitled "Adopted Kid Bitter About Not Getting the Money." A podcast host dissected my every word, comparing me to a troubled character from a prestige drama. Then came the death threats. Buried among supportive emails were anonymous messages filled with vitriol. Some calling me a disgrace, some telling me to disappear. The first blow came from Phoenix Analytics, the firm I had a consulting contract with. "We're terminating the agreement effective immediately," the email read. "This decision reflects our commitment to avoiding public controversy." They didn't even call. Arthur's warning echoed in my ears. "Without me, you'll crumble." He meant for it to be a curse. Andrew struck next. He held a press conference surrounded by a new legal team in navy suits. Cameras rolled as he stated, "These allegations are false, defamatory, and based on manipulated evidence. We will pursue all available legal remedies." He painted me as a mentally unstable man, fixated on rewriting history. "Technology can falsify anything now," he added, tapping the DNA report I had shown. The Harrington family circled their wagons. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years posted long paragraphs defending Harold and Nicholas, citing years of resentment in me. "He was always different," one wrote, "always angry that he didn't belong. Now he's destroying the family legacy out of spite." The same people who once toasted my high school graduation now like tweets calling me a sociopath. They didn't mourn my absence, they rewrote it. I sat alone in a studio apartment in Tucson. The temporary lease still had 5 months left. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Kenneth. Just a few lines, something like, "I never meant to hurt you. I hope one day you'll understand." But I stopped. Instead, I clicked on an old audio file from my phone. Ellen's voice filled the room, soft, measured, reading aloud from The Great Gatsby, her favorite novel. She said, "You never really know how strong you are until the truth is the only thing you have left." And I let that truth echo in the silence. The envelope had no return address, no markings beyond my name. Scrolled in slanted ink like someone trying to mask their handwriting. I held it with hesitation, my breath shallow as I peeled it open. Inside was a single photograph. Me and Ellen, flour dusted on our faces. Her hand resting gently over mine as we rolled dough in the warm afternoon light. It must have been taken through the kitchen window. I turned it over. Just 5 words in crooked, rushed handwriting. "She'd be ashamed of you." I dropped the photo. For a moment, everything inside me froze. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I knew that handwriting. I spent hours in Walter's office scanning documents before I left. Financial records, old contracts, HR complaints. Jessica's signature was on a non-disclosure agreement from a decade ago. I pulled it up on my laptop, zoomed in on a fingerprint smudge near her name. Then I compared it to the one on the flap of the envelope. It wasn't conclusive, not legally, but I knew Lauren was watching me. I didn't know where from or what she wanted now that Christopher's lawsuit was collapsing. But her reach hadn't disappeared. It had only gone quiet. That was worse. I tried calling Maria, the housekeeper, who knew too much. The number no longer worked. I drove to her neighborhood. Her apartment was empty. A neighbor, a retired nurse who used to wave at me every other morning, leaned over the fence. She was asked to leave, she said softly. Something about an incident with the Harringtons. Nobody told us more. They were still scrubbing away the people who remembered the truth. Silencing them one by one. I felt the old weight settle back into my chest. That same pressure from the hospital. From the night Andrew told the nurse I wasn't Lucas's mother. That I was confused, delusional. I wasn't delusional now. Sophie showed up at my place that evening. She sat across from me, her eyes scanning the kitchen like she expected it to be bugged. "If you wait any longer," she said, "they'll flip the story. You'll be the bitter ex, or worse, the unstable one who clung too hard to a dead woman's memory." "I have evidence," I said. "They can't twist that." She gave me a look. "You think social media cares about evidence? You want to reclaim your name? Don't post it. Publish it." That night, I drove downtown to the offices of the Arizona Herald. The lobby was dim. The security guard barely looked up as I entered. I found the investigative desk and placed a hard drive on the editor's cluttered desk. He looked up at me, startled. "I'm not here for sympathy," I said. "I just want the truth in print for once." He asked for my name. I gave it to him, the one I had always been ashamed of. The paper hit the stands on a Thursday morning. The sun hadn't even risen when the first text came in. Then the second, then 10 more. "Scandal in Paradise Valley. The Harrington family unmasked." The article was brutal. A bullet list of betrayal. Each section colder than the last. Screenshots of texts between Olivia and Benjamin, outlining how they'd split Ronald's company once Ellen was no longer a concern. Receipts from a boutique hotel in Sedona. Dated the same week Nicholas claimed to be at a fintech conference in Denver. Security footage. Christopher holding Rebecca's waist in my kitchen. Lucas's favorite toy, the stuffed lion, visible on the counter. And worst of all, audio. Lauren's voice, sweet, calm, unmistakable. "Nicholas's father will be here tomorrow. Honey, we'll have to tell Lucas the truth eventually." The internet exploded. Justice for Caleb trended on X for 2 straight days. Local news stations aired exposés on Christopher's past lawsuits. His financial manipulation of Ellen's estate. A few national outlets picked it up, too. The Phoenix-era scandal, they called it. By Monday, Andrew's startup had lost 3 investors. Emily forwarded me a clip from court. His countersuit was thrown out. Lack of merit. Authenticity of evidence confirmed by independent digital analysts. His empire of carefully curated lies had crumbled in 1 week. As for Abigail, she disappeared offline. But not before being removed from the exclusive Camelback Golf Club. Her trust fund accounts were frozen due to asset disputes. An old cousin of Ellen's filed a claim on the family heirloom ring Abigail had been wearing. And I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly, just quiet. Then came the final message. A text from a number I didn't recognize. No greeting. "You got what you wanted. But Lucas has no father now. Congratulations." I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied with a photo. Ellen laughing in the kitchen, her eyes soft, flower on her cheek. I wrote, "Lucas will grow up knowing the truth. That's the best gift I can give him." A month later, a friend from Yuma sent me a blurry photo. Patrick standing outside a rundown motel, unshaven, hollow-eyed, alone. His company's stocks had tanked after the article. The board voted to replace him. No official statement from him, just a letter written in careful cursive. "I failed you as a father. I see that now. If you ever decide I'm worth anything, maybe you'll let me be a friend." I kept the letter. I didn't know why. That afternoon, I returned to the Herald. The editor handed me a print copy of the original article. I held it for a long time. Behind the paper on the wall was the blown-up photo of Ellen they'd used in the feature. She looked luminous, like herself. "I did it, Mom," I whispered. "The truth set me free. But it did more than that. It saved what was left of your name. And maybe, in some small way, it saved me, too." 1 month after the article ran, everything fell quiet. I wasn't the courtroom firecracker anymore. The media had moved on to fresher meat. But my name still floated in the ether, pinned to words like justice, fabricated family, and truth from the forgotten son. I lived in a modest apartment off Speedway in Tucson. The walls were thin, the carpet threadbare. But for the first time in years, no one raised their voice at me. Or asked for more than I had to give. And yet, I still felt like I was surviving, not living. One morning, as I shuffled through the day's mail, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten, jagged pen strokes betraying a trembling hand. Everything I built, my marriage, my name, even the image I had of myself, crumbled. And maybe I needed it, too. "If you're willing, not to forgive, but to meet me as a man who wants nothing but honesty, I'd be grateful. Not as your father, just someone who's failed and knows it." It was signed Matthew. There was no plea, no redemption arc tucked between the lines. Just the wreckage of a man realizing too late what he'd lost. I agreed to meet him. We sat at a small cafe near the University of Arizona. Early, barely anyone around. He wore a faded sweater and looked smaller, somehow less formidable, more human. He slid a small box across the table. Inside was a stack of photographs, me and Ellen. Sun-soaked afternoons, library runs, our mismatched smiles. I found them, he said quietly, voice cracking. She fought me to keep these. I never understood why. Now I do. We didn't talk about the past or the possibility of a future. We drank our coffee in silence, and for once, it was enough. News came a week later. Rebecca had lost custody of Ethan. DNA had confirmed Nicholas's paternity. But neither he nor Lauren were deemed fit to raise the child. The court placed Ethan with one of Ellen's distant relatives in Flagstaff, a retired librarian named Grace. She lived in a small house with a wildflower garden and a dog named Waffles. I visited once. Ethan seemed calm there. Safe. I didn't fight for custody. I knew better now what a child needed and what I couldn't yet give. Instead, I turned my energy toward something else. I used a portion of the settlement from the case to establish the Ellen Fund, a scholarship supporting orphans in Arizona who pursued humanities or data science. At the launch, I spoke before a crowd of 30 students, social workers, and friends. Family isn't built by blood. It's built by choice. Ellen chose me. And today, I choose you. A week later, I stood in front of a neglected lot in Tucson. The same patch of land Ellen once dreamed of turning into a bookshop. I'd bought it. I drove a small sign into the ground. Coming soon, Ellen's library. Rain started to fall. Not a downpour, just a soft drizzle. And for the first time in years, as I stood there drenched in memory, my heart was quiet. It came in another letter. Written in looping cursive on cream paper. From Susan O'Connell. She claimed she'd known Patricia since college at Vanderbilt. In the letter, she wrote that Barbara had once mentioned a hidden journal. Said it was beneath a stairboard in her old house in Paradise Valley. If someone finds it, she told me, they're ready to know what's inside. The next day, I drove out there. The house had been listed for sale, but no one had touched it in months. Paint peeled from the walls. The garden had surrendered to weeds. Inside, I made my way to the old reading nook Nancy loved. The stair creaked beneath my weight. I lifted the third board, just as Helen described. There it was, a tin box. Inside, a journal wrapped in fraying blue fabric. The pages smelled of old paper and lavender. In her final entries, Diane wrote about the last year of her life. Her fear, her isolation. Her heartbreak over watching me retreat after her diagnosis. And her suspicion, no, her quiet certainty about Abigail and Christopher. I knew, she wrote, long before it surfaced. But I chose silence. I wanted to give you one last year of peace, however false. I wanted to hold the family together, even if it was crumbling beneath me. Then came the line that shattered me. My son doesn't carry my blood, but he carries my heart. And that's enough to make me smile as I watch the sun for the last time. The final page held a choice. If you found this, you've likely forgiven yourself, maybe even forgiven him. You can choose to leave this journal buried or let its light spill outward. Here's the letter I never sent him. Tucked between the pages was a second envelope addressed to Ronald. A confession. She had known everything. Had chosen silence, not weakness, but love. A love that still ached from beyond the grave. I sat on the old hardwood floor. The journal trembling in my hands, tears falling freely. I wept, not from betrayal, but from the unbearable loneliness of a woman who loved too fiercely in a house that had gone cold too soon. Later that night, I sat by my fireplace, the journal in my lap. I didn't burn it. I placed it gently on the shelf. Right between the Great Gatsby and the ledger I kept for the Ellen Fund. The truth had freed me. Now I could choose how to live with it. Weeks later, the library opened its doors. Children gathered on a hand-woven rug, circling around me. I read aloud the words Margaret used to read to me when thunder shook the windows. So we beat on, boats against the current. The sun poured through the tall windows, catching on the only photo in the room. Ellen, mid-laugh, her eyes glittering with something eternal. And for the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was home.